Hey there, and welcome to the Poetry of Predicament podcast. And I'm your eternal host, Dean Walker. And this is in the first half of May 2021 that I'm posting this particular episode, um, right in the middle of a very busy time here with Living Resilience, which, of course, is the website behind all this stuff, and Deep Academy, which is the body of work, the programs page where people can sign up for collapse aware support and resources and online video learning series and so on. Speaking of that, we've got a remarkable kind of a streamlined introduction to uh, to the body of work of Deep Academy, and really excited about that. It's going to be five live Zoom sessions over 5 weeks, starting in the end of June. And I'll put a link to how to sign up for that, of course, in the show notes here. So that's all there is to say right at the moment. I'm just really excited about that and hope you'll invite friends who are new to the collapse aware conversation, and actually those who are very familiar with the collapse aware conversation. It's intended to be useful for both. But I also wanted to mention that this is a very busy time in terms of just stuff to put together in the world. I'm doing a little mini series on science communicators, and I've just got a kind of a grudge going on a couple of science communicators who, over the years, have swung wildly from one end of the spectrum to the other in terms of being antagonistic to the public or to common sense. Some do a wonderful job, and I'll do my best to mention those in the series. Some are doing just a downright toxic and shameful job of it, and I'll also try to point out some of that. So thank you for your patience, those of you who are keeping track of these elements as they are posted. I've got some really good ones coming to finish up the season, excuse me, the series. But today's episode is something that is for my system a real relief. It's There's only so much that I can really put up with in terms of the usual propaganda BS that passes for the reportage about any of the global predicaments that we face. It's pretty much from top to bottom useless or worse. And there are times when my system needs a rest. And about the only place that I get the kind of rest that is really nourishing, other than just numbing out, which is obviously not particularly, although I'm good at it, as good as anybody, I suppose. I know that it's not nourishing to that strained system. So I'm bringing in today interview that I had recently with a poet from the UK, whom he was suggested to me just a few weeks ago, and booked him immediately as soon as I got a sense of his work. I hope you find him as refreshing and inspiring and deep as I did. Just exactly what my system needs to just be able to find meaning and to find connection and to find beauty, even in the face of predicament, even in the face of our shadow and the other elements that just don't seem to be letting up much. So I'm looking forward to getting your feedback. If you leave some responses in the show notes for the this UK poet named Dom Berry. So we'll start out right in the middle in a kind of a what sounds like a random part of the in our getting to know one another for the first time in our conversation. So I hope you'll be patient with that. I think it unfolds quite quickly, and we really get down to where the conversation is that kind of deep nourishment. And it's not traditional. It's not linear. And he does share with us one of his poems from his soon to be released globally book um, about rites of passage. So thank you all for staying with me here on the poetry of predicament and through the busy times and through the sparse posting times. There's a lot of really exciting stuff coming, and these are extraordinary times. So let's stay together and especially pay attention to these moments of deep nourishment. Dom Barry.
I'm Dean Walker, and welcome to the Poetry of Predicament podcast, a podcast for people brave enough to face humanity's challenges and problems, and most importantly, our numerous predicaments. The Poetry of Predicament is a podcast meant to inspire us to bring forth grace, beauty, and connection with the web of life in the face of a predicament-laden world.
As I mentioned in the intro prior to this intro, this has been a very, very busy time and a time full of the usual craziness of this world. And there are times like this when nothing else quite nourishes the soul like a good conversation with a poet. And I got just the character for you. A man named Dominic Barry from the UK. Got a book recently published in the UK, soon to be available in the USA. And I hope that you find his presence and his words as nourishing as I have. Dom Barry.
Clear to me over that. I mean, this book has taken me 10 years to write, and I mean, I've been lucky that on that road it's gathered some momentum with a number of different prizes, etc., etc. But the core of it has always been is that the core of the writing of the book was actually seeing often the poetic response actually to where we are and where we find ourselves, and feeling a little bit lost with it, and feeling a little bit like what like what where's the I didn't feel that there was a willingness to really go to the depths of where we need to go to, and to stand at the cold edge of possibility in both ways. To act, and this hopefully that's what I've attempted to do with this book, is to really bring readers to that point of where it's not, and it's also not a rhetorical response. So a lot of because it's so hard to feel and experience like the reality of where we are, and what happens often with I think poets, many times becomes a very heady response to where we are.
Mm-hmm.
So it's almost the same as if we're responding as a newspaper. It's almost the same as if we're responding as a rhetorically, and also about something which is always outside of ourselves. So I came across lots and lots of writing which would always be not in the body. It wasn't the body that was responding. It wasn't the grief. It wasn't the tenderness, and also the ferocity that the body holds in response to crisis, in response to those moments and tension of human and man-made and environmental catastrophe. But it was the mind often I saw which was responding, understandably, out of the state of just not being able to comprehend this, what was happening. And I think the rite of passage really it's an immersion into where we are, but not in a sense of trying to understand it, but in feeling it, and feeling the possibility of extinction, feeling the very personal, lived experience of what it means to be alive on a dying planet, So what it goes into, like, what are the personal narratives that brings up when you come, and this is also the work I do when, when you're a child, say, now, but also my generation growing into the world, and you have this life coming through you, which is like amazing. Okay, my life is going to be really interesting. Okay, and then at the age of about 18, 19, you see this looming huge thing on the horizon, which is the potential death of not only civilization as we know it, but also the planet and everything we love. And it's just like, ah, yeah, that changes everything. That really does. And so it's how, yeah, that this was the response really of the personal response. Like, do I have children? Like, how can I bring a child into this world? Like, how can I live with hope for my own life, but also hope for the lives of others, of those that I love in this particular time? And how is that possible?
Hmm.
And I'm sure we'll talk a little bit later about, well, I'd love to talk a little bit later how the journey has been for me, and then hopefully what then the personal is then speaking to the universal within the book, of like what I call the heart crack of crisis.
Yeah.
Not the grief, because the grief is an important part, but actually getting to the heart crack, where actually the crack opens towards life again.
Right. I'm curious. Um, do you have um, a few paragraphs, some sort of a taste of that moment, that cracking open moment that you could share with us?
Sure, I think actually there's probably one poem in the book which really sings to that very thing most,
Hmm.
and it's a poem called "Seeing the Whole World Begin Kindling." Um, and it's a poem which was written really when about 4 years ago. I think I think it was just as Trump was being um, inaugurated into the White House, and I think my hope for humanity and the planet was just at its all-time low, and actually I became very ill with chronic fatigue syndrome and ME, which was just, my life force was just wiped and done, and this world which I just wanted to push it away. I couldn't sustain this being in this world at that moment. And this is a poem really of moving through that, of the illness of 2 years of the anxiety within the system, of like the terror, and of then the cracking open to that. So maybe I'll read that now. Of course, of course. So this poem is called "Seeing the Whole World Begin Kindling." Seeing the whole world begin kindling, I had no choice but shut myself off from it, from the blue sky and the sea, and the salmon lashing its black water white. Too long from the woods that breathe me, and the soil that is now being burnt away, until illness came, thicker than any kind of dark water, and laid me out, gave me a bed and 2 long years to sweat through. Outside, the world went on. Inside, fever rolled across my body's new landscape, and I dragged myself to each of its craggy edges, begging for a cure. I would have swallowed all of Eden then, to be given back a miracle. Nothing but more heat came, and I crawled back inside and collapsed back in bed for another year, until I was so afraid, till I began to dream the dreams no human should dream, of Europe in front of me, like a bombed out cathedral, of all those I love dying on repeat. I wept so wildly then. I, a grown man, wept and shook, until I was no longer afraid of dying, until I felt something other than the voices of my domestication wake in me, and the life that deserted me drip back in, slowly at first, then at a rush. Then the whole room was full of fresh water, and a new voice came, rising up from a deeper well, shouting, "Stand now for the life you have been given. Stand so that others may find courage in these times to do so too." And so I hauled myself up and out of bed, and dragged myself downstairs, and threw the carcass of my old life out into the garden, and banged my hands on the hard ground, and prayed for the earth's sap to rise up through me again, like a purer kind of water, electric to the touch of my new skin. I prayed for the strength in my own bones then, for the guidance of my heart crashing in its cage, and for my soul that I had left too long to walk someone else's road. It calls out to me now, as the wheeling buzzard calls. It says, "Listen to what I ask of you. Stand out tonight under the dark sky. Wait for a greater pulse to rise up through you there. Let it guide you towards resurrection." It says, "Run naked out onto the streets, singing for the soil and the soft earth. It needs you now to burn inside as brightly as the forests outside burn. The ashes these mad times bring are here for rising out of." It says, "Never doubt, but if you answer stubbornly the sound of your wild heart beating, that the house we live in can one day be green again." There you go. Just a light poem for the
Yeah.
afternoon.
Yeah, I could see that being a fit.
Yeah, yeah, I think so. Right. Uh, uh, yeah.
So Dom, I don't know you at all. Uh,
No.
you were recommended to me from a friend who had been exposed to your writing,
Mm.
and I'm so glad that that's happened. Would you tell us a little bit about your growing up? What led up? What are some of the significant signposts along the way that had you end up in this place writing this type of expression?
It's a very good question. How long have I got? I'll try and give you a concise answer. Um, so I think the journey is really actually quite a simple one, and that is emerging into this world, which I felt in my heart and my soul was so beautiful and is so beautiful. And it is, despite the fact that, yes, on one level it is now dying, it is this beautiful, and it is that beauty which often we want to live for still. And I think growing up, my core love for this earth, and my core love for nature and for humans and for being on this planet, um, as I began to write, the ecological and environmental emergency that we now face began to become a force in itself, which was irreconcilable to me, irreconcilable without me putting my pen to it. And as I deepened into my own writing practice, these poems began to come more and more strongly through. And the journey very much was one in my early 20s of disbelief, of seeing of shock, of feeling that there was increasingly uh, less and less chance of us turning this moment this time around, and writing really into that heartbreak, that disbelief and the terror, and wanting also to communicate not with something which is rhetorical or which is preachery, but is really asking, like, you, my readers, to get to our knees together right now. And this is then what began to emerge with rite of passage, is not this thing of like blame, or these poems um, of an earth which is outside of the self, but the earth which is inside of the self,
Hmm.
and the earth of the body and the animal body and the human self reacting to where we are, and that reaction of the quaking of the animal self, of the feeling the collective quaking of, if you're connected to the earth, and yet also that holding that tension then of what happens next. And if we do have, as looks like we're running rapidly towards collapse, and not only systematic collapse, but environmental, ecological degradation, to the point in which the underpinning the fabric of the world begins to erode, to the point at which it no longer becomes inhabitable for the amount or the existence of humanity as we have on the planet. What happens next? And only the book really took me down, and only through going through that very personal journey, which is also the collective universal journey of every single human being right now on the planet, could I actually feel the heart crack in the grief of a new story, a different story. And not, this isn't a story of hope which is grounded in something which is completely spiritual, or or in denial of the reality of what we face, but is encompassing of that, hopefully, of the life pulse of opportunity, and the life pulse that, and the story of emergency that we've had to come to this moment to choose, ultimately. And only in this moment, only in this heart crack, can we choose. It had to be this way. And this is what we face now as a collective humanity. And it's not going to be easy, and it's not going to be pretty. And there will be death and destruction, but we also get to choose. And I think that's really what the book is about,
Mhm.
is the willingness after that, after the facing of the grief, to interact differently with ourselves, with each other, and with the earth that we call home.
Right. Uh, I'm assuming that what you've just described, it seems like that's the territory that you're implying with the title of your book.
Yes.
And, and it seems like it's the rite of passage that you might be uh, speaking of. It seems like it's quite a bit different from, I've been studying different kinds of rites of passage, and I've, done some Vision Quest guiding work and that sort of thing. What I've noticed about though virtually every one of those long-standing traditions or the new variants that have come from those, they're a intentionally held container that still carries the risk for the person that's going through the rite of passage. Seems like there's always some element of risk, but it's also is a container, a conscious
Mm,
container,
mm,
and a conscious process that has some lineage to it.
mm.
When I'm just speaking of my history and what little I know about it. I'm curious if you have anything to say about what seems to be a lack of lineage
Mm,
here. You know, that threshold that you describe us being on and the choice point that I hear you so beautifully describing.
mhm.
I'll just relay my experience is that I don't feel that there's anyone consciously holding this, certainly not at scale.
Mm.
And so I'm curious if there is some um, dimension of the mystery or the unknown or letting go that
Mm.
you might have been including in your creation, your rendition of a rite of passage. Is that communicating as a question?
Yeah, I think so. Let me just so I can answer it correctly, or not correctly, but with just the right context. So we're talking about this moment as a rite of passage, but there aren't the containers to bring people into for this moment.
Yeah.
It's like, for example, say you go through a rite of passage which is maybe shamanic or is like of a certain lineage, and you go through that process, and it's maybe to from for me a rite of passage is from one state to another often,
Mhm.
and there's certain rite of passages from that we're used to within humanity that take us from boyhood to manhood or from this state of life to, and they haven't been there and they used to be there, but there is no there's no one holding the container, right, for
Right.
this rite of passage that we're going through right now.
Exactly.
Yeah, and this for me is interest ironic not ironically but coincidentally what I'm becoming more and more interested in, um, and it's kind of bubbled to the surface with the book in that what so for example the initial I mean the book's only been out for 2 weeks, but the overwhelming um, response to the book has been of a transition of state of being, that when you read the book, because what it what it does is it takes you through. So I mean it's actually set in the form of a requiem mass. Um, so it's formed in four main sections, which is Kyrie, Dies Are, Liberami, and In Paradisum. And what it does is it takes the reader into first the distorted relationship we have with the earth. So the cry for help. Then it takes us into facing the brunt edge of climate collapse, systematic collapse, war, potential, potential face the human facing the reality of that,
Mhm.
and then it takes us through and afterwards. So what happens afterwards in the ashes of that? What comes? And hopefully that this is an initial. What I feel for me is this is an initial map of how creativity and also so how on one hand how writing and creativity can provide those portals for people to go into, not just as a horrifying novel experience but actually a literal, like, you read this book and hopefully from what I've seen people come out not healed in a way of, oh, I feel healed, okay, great, but like down to the core and then through again.
Mhm.
For me, what I believe is that the exact pressures that we have of ecological collapse and of um, climate change and the pressures we have on the exterior, if we can create the conscious containers for that rite of passage to allow people into into where we are right now, and then almost like a diamond being collapsed from the exterior pressures, what is this actually asking of us? Like, we can choose whether to go into terror um and not loving other people. We can choose these options. This is what we have as a collective choice now. Or we can ultimately, what I feel is allow and find these ways through ritual, through ceremony, through creative rite of passage to collapse individuals, collective groups into soul and into being in a different way as a human being through these, ironically, through these pressures that we now face.
Mm.
And yes, I mean, in terms of creating rites of passage for humans in this moment of time, yes, like this is like, I feel it's completely necessary and I fully support anyone who does it. And I'm starting to find the webs and the threads of also how I will do that myself. I think there's various schools of thought and of spiritual understanding which can then actually be combined um, with with the environmental aspect of it, that actually can be very potent vehicles for resilience and for shift.
Right.
Hopefully that answers your question relatively well.
Yeah, I'd say that answers my question. That's really brilliant. Um, I'm struck at what a great fit um, your your particular type of creativity and expression and presence is for uh, that that aspect of my own work and my own curiosity in this world.
Mm,
I have an immense curiosity about this.
mm,
Let's call it a neighborhood that you're describing, where you've been writing your book and experiencing this
mm,
world.
mm,
I am not a poet. I've certainly written some poetry, and I've enjoyed and and thought, fairly highly of some of my words, but it just doesn't flow uh, with nearly the intent
mm,
that folks like yourself have. And so I enjoy visiting this neighborhood.
mm,
It's very inspiring, and I always leave with new openings and some sort of advancement in my level of curiosity and the
mm,
qualities of that curiosity, the qualities of relatedness, the qualities of attention that I get
mm,
to walk
mm,
away with and carry into the next question and the next moment.
mm, mm,
So I really appreciate it. And what I'm already starting to sort of conjure a bit about if we could do another get together in the near
mm.
future. I didn't realize that your book has been out such a short while. It's really a
Yeah,
perfect timing.
it's really only just arrived.
I'm a big fan of shameless promotion. I just can't wait to help you promote and get the word out about your book. And so
Yeah,
I'm
thank you.
curious if perhaps you and I could set up another get together in the next couple of weeks or month or so, and it would be really wonderful for me. And I guess what I'll do is share a little piece of my explorations these days, and I'm curious if you would share whatever you have going on in a similar way.
Mm,
Uh, I find there's an immense dance between um, keeping my heart open and keeping myself um, as present in the moment as I can, while also um, the only way I know how to keep generating compassion is to some degree or another keep a pulse on what's going on in this world,
mm, mm,
and particularly here in the USA, um, energetically, politically, and in a number of other ways, it's excruciating.
mm. Of course, yeah, yeah. Jesus.
It's not just one color or one dimension,
mm,
but there's enough of that which is for me shows up as excruciating to hold and to just be witness to in that process of generating compassion best I know how at this point.
mm, mm,
Um, what I'm finding is that there's this dance that I need to be doing between those two. And sometimes it just is letting go, just disengaging
mm,
and giving myself a chance to clear and
mm,
to deploy my attention in whole different dimensions. And that's, thank God I have that ability.
yeah.
But I'm also curious if you could share with us, and this is really what I was aiming at in sharing this with you, is there's another kind of letting go that, again, I'm just thankful for my mentors over many years of being able to let go at deeper and deeper levels.
Mm,
There's an energetics uh, based letting go when I do touch into what's going on in the world. And there's, I remember I started with contemplative practice and the roots of this quite early on, mid
mm,
teenage years.
mm,
And I remember being so proud of myself. I heard about this idea of letting go, in my early days of meditation. And I was struggling early meditator. Just, it was very, very hard. And I would get to a point where I would let go of some piece that was plaguing me or difficult to work around in my process. And I was so proud of myself. Oh, I really know what letting go is now.
mm, mm,
And I'm laughing because it has been pretty much a nonstop parade on sometimes a number of times a year. I would have the next scale, the next level of letting go that it is just breathtaking, and I would just be certain that it just can't get any bigger or more impactful than this moment of letting go.
mm.
So I just wanted to share that's part of my process, and I'm
Absolutely.
still that's still a very regular occurrence for me, and I'm still as amazed every time it comes through.
Uh-huh.
I'm curious if you have anything like that, and I won't go into too much, but when you were sharing your story of the chronic fatigue and a couple of years of
Mm,
just barely being able to see outside of the hole that it sounded
yeah.
like you're in.
Yeah.
I'm I'm curious if since that time in particular, you have some sort of cyclical cycling through your own process. As I
Mm,
was just describing my cycling through this letting go on a regular basis. Does that ring a bell? Does that spark anything that you
completely.
could share?
And I think my response to this is around, I guess, around creativity and around what emerges from the empty space where let go is possible.
Mhm.
And, like, it's the biggest challenge right now for anyone who is desiring to respond to the planet and the situation we face on it, to respond from a place of creativity. Because and this is the cycle, we see where we are, and we can't help but look around and be like, ah, this doesn't look so good, this doesn't look so great. And we can then go into, that very much flight and fight response of like, okay, I'm not in acceptance right now, I need to do something, point fingers, there's the government, yeah. And that's a completely natural, understandable,
Mhm.
more than human response to what we're facing right now. And yet, ironically, at this moment, like there's such a force of evolution which is wanting to pulse through in the absence of that. And so again, it's a cycle, ironically, of letting go of having to change the world. So like that, the old beautiful martyr complex that I'm sure many of us have, like, okay, it's up to me, no one else is doing it. And that's just not, that's not true, but it doesn't serve coming together and creating both from yourself but also with others. And I think so. I'm sure you're aware of Joanna Macy's work. Yeah. So I love Joanna Macy's work, and I feel there is a next iteration to that. And maybe we seem like we're on similar lines here.
Yeah,
And
I'm sorry. I was just laughing, and it's a little bit rude for me to distract you like that. But
no.
I've been involved with the deep adaptation community since
Good.
the inception of the forum a couple of years ago, and I have been involved with work very similar to Joanna Macy's for decades.
Mm.
And my main thrust as I was in the deep adaptation
Yeah.
forum and producing interviews
Yeah.
with thought leaders, I ended up interviewing two people that Joanna wrote books with, Chris Johnstone and Molly Young Brown.
Got it.
And the entire thrust of why I wanted to speak with them was it seems like we are facing a very different world than the one that Joanna Macy first responded to by creating the work that reconnects.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so what are y'all doing to evolve the work that reconnects?
Yeah.
And because that's
Yeah.
one of the strongest motivators in me putting together this body of work that I've
Right.
done is that the work that reconnects up till very, very recently was about as good as it got.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
it. And I could see, oh, we are so screwed if that is as good as it gets. Not that it's bad,
Yeah.
but
Exactly. Yeah.
like
Yeah.
it's just
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
making the mark. So
Yeah.
thank you for letting me make now a distraction of you into a huge interruption. So
No.
please
No. No.
continue.
No, that's great. I love the riffing. It's not. It's for me. This is a conversation. This is the conversation,
Yeah.
and I love that we've come to this moment, because actually this is the nub of it, right? Is so, and I'm gonna maybe go a little bit esoteric, but hopefully ground it also as well in this moment, and say that if you if you look at the world as it is, especially the Western world, and you look at how in the face of a world in which we can't find equilibrium with our own nervous systems, we can't find equilibrium within ourself or our understanding of the world as it is, we've turned naturally to uh, Eastern forms of thought, and mainly about acceptance of life as it is, an acceptance of a way of what is, and that's a really crucial step. But for me, and this, it means then we still watch life, so we become the observer of life, happening, rather than the creative nuclear reactors of life at our core. And for me, if I was to have like, and this is a project I'm also working on, which is very, very new, but it will be maybe coming online in the next year or so, which is what if we got every single person right now who loved and was devoted at this moment in time of crisis to move as life again in this moment, and the wild inherent upwelling of life and the creativity and the collective creativity that actually life wants to bring in this moment, rather than purely the awareness of and the acceptance of. Because and for me that's the next stage, is the initiation stage into being life. And that is then when The thoughts, the drops, the moments of inspiration that will actually help us to change will actually come, and will stop that huge bulk of life force, which is currently being held in paralysis and fear, to actually be released. And for me, that would be, and that's kind of what I'm now starting to create as well. So I'm like a collective response. Right now, my focus is very much on the stories which we tell right now in this moment that carry us potentially between worlds. And what are the stories which we want to tell collectively that will help this? So what is it, for example, is it shifting the narrative from grief and loss to heart crack? What does that then do if we change the small minutiae of that language and that? Also, where do we change, for example, if you look at RIP Earth to ROP Earth, so rest in peace Earth to rite of passage for humanity. So these small nuances and changing of the story in terms of where we face ourselves right now, and how that actually galvanizes the creative life force of the individual and the collective responding to this crisis. So that's what, that's just, I think that was answering the question.
Yeah.
Yes, and then that's just, and for me, that's the next stage, and it's like we come to acceptance, and then what? How do we learn to respond with the fullness of our hearts and the fullness of our souls and the creativity that's endemic within them?
It's really uncanny, the amount of parent resonance, if not full-on overlap, of so much of what you're sharing with my own orientation. Perhaps one of the differences might be that my own lineage was primarily in the energetics, study of energetics, or the shamanic side of transformation and energetics, and then went on to a multi-decade career in a more traditional or business as usual formulation of transformation-based work, which was still powerful, but obviously really different than something more earth-based or more having a more heartful or energetics foundation to it. I'm I'm more excited than ever about the idea of having another conversation with you in the near future, if that would be all right.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't already say yes, but I had said yes in my mind.
All right.
So I just realized, 100%. Like this is the core of me, and it's clearly we have that core which we share with each other. So I'm 100%. I'd love to. That'd be great. And thank you.
Well, Dom, unfortunately for me, the envelope of this particular conversation is needing to come to a close, and I am just so thankful for my friend suggesting that we connect. It was
Who was that?
Really,
you know who that was?
A guy named Terry Rankin, who's another person from both the deep adaptation community and also the XR and XR America community as well. And he's a philosopher by trade, and so he keeps his spidey sense out there for people like yourself who have an expression that tends to go right into the implicit senses.
Yeah, amazing.
He has a good eye for that.
Thank you. Like I've never met Terry. I will Google him shortly, but I mean, this also fills me with a lot of hope that the book is reaching the right people and the right moments. So thank you so much. I really appreciate you having me on this to have a conversation, because this is it. Like this is the core. This is the So thank you so much, Dean. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for watching another episode of the Poetry of Predicament podcast, produced by Dean Walker and the Living Resilience Alliance. www.livingresilience.net. Music today from Michael Hedges, as always, and also Port Blue Into the Sea. Also available on our website, www.livingresilience.net, is a wide array of articles, online learning series, arranging group and individual resilience coaching, and sign up for our every other Tuesday free support group that we call Safe Circle Calls.